Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Basra Daf Nun Zayin, Bava Basra 57, and we'll start on the 2 lines from the bottom of 56b. Today's Daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Hatzal for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael, and the Seis Tzara. So says the Mishnah had stated, Shlosha Achin ve'echam etzdarif yimayin. Now let's say you have 3 brothers, let's say call them Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and they each want to testify that another person had a chazak on the property for 1 year. And Reuven, who's not related, comes along and testifies with Shimon about year 1, Levi, Shimon's brother, about year 2, and Yehuda, Shimon and Levi's brother, about year 3. Harei elu shalosh edios. These are considered 3 groups of witnesses. Ein edus achas la'hazaman. And it's one testimony as it relates to hazama, meaning to say that we had seen 2 explanations for this. One explanation is that they're not considered to be zomamin until all of them, or the other explanation is that they can all be considered zomamin, that we view them all together in order to make them zomamin. So the Gemara on the top of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph gives us a related case. So there was a contract where there were 2 people who signed on it. And then what happened was there was the desire by the part of the lender to do what's called kiyum shtaros, i.e. to certify the document. And we saw already in the main sugya about kiyum shtaros and ksuvos that one of the ways to certify the document is to have the witness himself testify that that's my signature, or else you can compare the signatures to another document that he put forward, or else you can have 2 witnesses coming to testify about that signature. So one witness came forward in this case to testify that that was his signature, and the other witness, he died. Shachav Chan Minayo. So the other witness died. So Asa Achua Dahai Dikai, Vechad Achrino Asude Achasimas Yade Diidach. So regarding witness number 2 who died, the brother of witness number 1 wanted to testify with a different person that was his signature. So Savar Ravina Meimar, so Ravina thought to say, listen, Hainu Masnisin, isn't this the case of our Mishnah where we say Gimel Achan, that there are 3 brothers, and one brother is joining with the other 2, meaning to say that even though the 2 brothers are technically speaking disqualified as a witness because they're considered to be like one, and so therefore you would need a second witness to come along and testify with them. But in this case, our Mishnah allowed the 3 brothers to testify on the property because each one of them is joining with a different witness. And so each one of them is only testifying about 1 a year, so they're not testifying along with their brother. And so too, in this case, the witness that's alive is testifying on his signature, and the other brother is testifying about the second signature. So it should be similar to the case of the property. So that's why Ravina thought to say that this was like the case of our Mishnah, and therefore we should allow it. So I'm like Rav Ashi said, what are you talking about? Me, Dami, the 2 cases are not the same. Excuse me. Hasa Monafik Nachi Riva de Mamona Puma da Achi. So in that case of our Mishnah, the testimony, the Nachi Riva is 3/4. In that case of our Mishnah, 3/4 of the money is not being determined by the mouth of the brothers. But in this case, 3/4 of the money is being determined by the mouth of the brothers. Meaning to say as follows, that in the case of our Mishnah, you combine the 3 brothers, their testimony is adding up to half of the testimony that's needed. But in this case, you combine the 2 brothers, their testimony is combining to 3/4 because the brother who's testifying about the dead witness combines with somebody else. So the other witness, which is the other brother, is half, and now this other brother is half of the other half. So therefore, it's 3/4, and so therefore you can't have 2 brothers determining 3/4 of the testimony. You can only have them determining half of the testimony. So now we come to the next Mishnah, and our Mishnah says, Eud Varim sheyesh lahem chazaka. These are the items that have a chazaka associated with them. And these are the items that don't establish a chazaka. Here, we're not talking about the same type of chazaka, which is that we have been discussing for earlier in our chapter, i.e., the chazaka being established in the land, and therefore it's yours with a taina because you've been using it for 3 years, and we assume that you don't have to keep the contract that long. And we're also not talking about the chazaka where you acquire something via proprietary act, as we'll see our Gemara will discuss. Rather, what we're talking about is what's called the chazaka of tashmishus, the chazaka that you have a right to use a property. As Rashbam says, these types of things, these are types of uses that we're going to say that a person is going to have the right to use them in his friend's property. And if you've been using it, and the Rashbam says 3 years, not everybody agrees with that. That if we've been doing this type of activity in the property for 3 years, then there's and the person hasn't objected, then there's the assumption that he has the right to do it, and he could claim you gave it to me. So the Rashbam says 2 things. The Rashbam says you need to have done it for 3 years, and you need to also have a claim that you gave me permission to use it or you sold it to me. And so that's what we're talking about, because otherwise the person would have objected to them. So what are these types of things that we're talking about that you can establish a chazak if you've been doing it for 3 years, whereas other things you can't? So these are the things that you cannot establish a chazaka. Just because you've been using it, it doesn't mean that the person gave you the right to use it. It just means he didn't object. Let's say you put an animal in your animal walk through your friend's property. So Rashbam says the list we're going to have, these are movables, and it's not something that you use on a regular basis. And so therefore the person isn't going to object within 3 years. He might only object after 4 or 5 years. And so therefore the person doesn't have a chazaka. So let's say you walk your dog across his property. So basically you put this animal in the courtyard, or tanur rechayim v'kirayim. You put an oven or a stove or a mill in his property. Where your chickens go in his property for no sins of or you drop the manure in the courtyard. In a chazaka, since all these things are movable, the guy might not have objected right away because he understands you're not going to be there for the long term. But if you build something, you build a partition for his animal more than 10 tefachim, or you build a wall, a partition for your oven or your stove, or for his millstone, or or you bring the chickens into the house. The asa makam was a voa amok shlosha, or you made a pit that's deeper than 3 tefachim, or gavoa shlosha, or higher than 3 tefachim. Harei zo chazaka. In all these cases, you've established a chazaka, because these are cases where the assumption is the person would have objected, and so therefore these are immovable, and so therefore you establish a chazaka through that. You have the right to use it in all these cases. So the Gemara asks the question, Ma'ishna reisha, Ma'ishna seifa. So the Gemara says, well, the Gemara is going to give several answers. Why in the first case do we say he has not established the right to use them? In the case where you have the animals or the courtyards or the ovens or raising the chickens, whereas in the second case where he builds the wall, he does not establish, he establishes the chazaka. In the first case, he does not. So we have several answers. So first is, Ula kol she'ilu b'nechse ager, kana b'nechse chavero, kana. Kol she'ilu b'nechse ager, lo kana, b'nechse chavero, lo kana. So Ula's approach is to say, well, it depends what we're talking about here. Ula's approach is that anything that would be an object, this refers to where you make a proprietary act. We call it the nechse ager. There's something that you find this onerous object. If you had done something there, it would have been considered a kinyan. Then if it would be the objects of his friend, he would actually acquire it. And anything that would be the property of the convert, he would not acquire it. Then on his friend, he would not acquire it. And so therefore, in this case, since if he's like moving his animals through the property, he doesn't acquire it if it was a nechse ager, if it was an unclaimed property. So therefore, if you're using it on your friend's property, you also don't acquire the right to use it. Whereas if it would be something that if you would do this act on unclaimed property, the nechse ager, you would build a partition, it would acquire it. So therefore, on your friends, it would acquire it. So that's basically the distinction that Ula offers. It depends if it's a proprietary act on an unclaimed property, then it's called a chazaka for tashmish as well. So Maskif for Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes challenges this. Who is this really a general rule? Very near. What if you find an unclaimed property and you plow it? If it's unclaimed property, property of a convert who died, that would work. But if your friend has a field and you just go and plow it, it's not a form of acquisition, because he could say, well, I didn't object because you were just doing me a favor and plowing my field for me. Or so too, the opposite way, if you go and eat fruit, that if you go into your friend's property and you start picking his apples, that shows that you own it. But a convert who dies property, that lo kana, that's not considered sufficient, because we're going, it's just an indication that he went in and acquired that fruit, not an indication that he's acquiring the property or the tree. So therefore, Elam are so meaning to say, we had learned this Gemara back on 54a that just going into the property of the unclaimed property and eating the fruit is not an indication that you acquired the tree or the field. So therefore, the Gemara says, Elam Rav Nachman Amarav Baravua. So therefore, a second approach says, Rav Nachman in the name of Rav Baravua, that here, what are we talking about? Hacha bechatzer ashutfin askinan. Here, what we're talking about, second approach is, we're referring to the courtyard of partners. So two people own this, own a courtyard together, and meaning to say, our mission is talking about that there are two partners who own a courtyard together, and one of the partners put his animals, let's say, allowed his animal to walk through the courtyard. Because if one person brings let's say, his animal into the courtyard without the permission of the other one, then that's not going to be established a chazaka. Because just, the fact that he did it doesn't mean that, and you didn't object. You could just say, oh, it's a temporary thing, I'll just hold my tongue. But if somebody would build an actual wall, then the other partner would object. So therefore, that's what we're referring to. The movable things you're not going to object, but building something permanent, the other partner would have objected, and therefore you can establish a chazaka. Gemara says, is that really the case? Tanan, didn't we learn in the Mishnah? Shutfin shenadru, hana zemizeh. Let's say you have partners who basically shenadru hana zemizeh. That let's say you have partners who take a vow that they're not going to get benefit from each other. Certainly, you're not going to be even allowed to enter into the other person's courtyard. So we see from here that even on a small portion, you're going to be, the partner would object. So we see from here that in this case also, they would have objected. Rashbam's language here is interesting. He says, as long as they have not, as long as they're not divided the courtyard, each one can go into the portion of his friend. And if each one went in, he'd be in violation of violating the vow. Why? Because you're benefiting from his friend who's by standing in his courtyard. Because just by standing there by yourself, the other person would object. Because if it would be the case that he didn't object, then you could stand in the courtyard of your friend, even though that he took a vow from it. So this is proof that the partners object to just even standing there. So the Gemara says, so here what we're talking about, Rav Nachman says the name of Rav Vua, we're talking about a third approach. He says that what we're talking about here is we're talking about the backyard. In the time of the Gemara, they used to use the front yards and not the backyard, so there was less, people cared less about the backyards. The there, people don't care if you just stand. But if you would build something in the backyard, people would care. That's the third approach, and that's why there's a distinction. So Rav Papa says the fourth answer. Rav Papa Amar Idi v'Idi v'Chatzar Hashutvin v'Ikad Kapti v'Ikad Lo Kapti. So Rav Papa gives a fourth answer. He says in both cases we're talking about a courtyard of partners, and there are sometimes where they'll be upset and sometimes where they won't care. So Gabe Mimona, with as it relates to money, then we're going to say Likua, we're going to be lenient because it's just money. And so therefore we'll be lenient and say, since some people are upset and some people are not upset, as it comes to a monetary matter, we're going to be lenient. And meaning to say, even though it's prohibited to use your friend's money without his permission, here we'll say it's permitted for a partner to use the courtyard that his friend owns without his permission, because we're going to we'll be lenient, and we'll say that the partners don't care about this small matter. Because since there are some who don't care, we'll say that they don't care. But Gabi Yisura, but as it relates to a vow, since there are some partners who care, we're going to be strict. Gabi Yisura, we're going to go l'chumra. We're going to be strict, and we'll say since some partners care, we won't be allowed to do it. So the Gemara says, Ravina Amar Olam Lo Kapti. Ravina says, no, the partners don't care. But in general, they don't care. But Hamani Rabbi Elazar, but the Mishnah in the Darim, who says that the partners care and you can't go into the courtyard, that's going to be position of Rabbi Elazar. The Tanya Rabbi Elazar, Omer, Rabbi Elazar said, I feel a vitor asar b'mudar now. If you take a vow against benefiting from somebody else, you're not allowed to even give him vitor. Vitor is the portion that sometimes the shopkeeper would throw in, just as like a gratuity, like let's say throws in extra cookie at the end. So even that little minuscule thing, like allowing the person to walk their dog in your courtyard, even that they would object in the case of where a person took a vow against the other. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Benah. So Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Benah. Rabbi Benah is not an often quoted authority by Rabbi Yochanan or in Shas, and so we're going to see what he says a few times on this stuff. So Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Benah, B'kol Shutfin Ma'akman Zetzeh. He says partners could always stop each other from doing anything in their courtyard, chutz min hakfisa, except you can't stop your partner from using it for laundry. Why? She'ein darkan shel benot Yisrael et bazos al hakfisa, because we don't want Jewish girls to become cheapened by doing the laundry in the public place, but down by the river. So therefore, you're allowed to use it in the courtyard, because when you're doing the laundry, it was a very heavy, intense labor, and parts of your body that were not supposed to be revealed might end up being revealed. And so that's the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Benah. So in this context, the Gemara cites the verse from Isaiah, Otsem Einav Meir Ospera, that who is somebody who can dwell in the presence of God, one who closes his eyes from looking at something that they shouldn't see. So Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Zeh she'ein mistakal b'nashim b'shas she'omedes al klisa. This refers to somebody who doesn't look at women when they're doing the laundry. And Hechidami, what are we referring to here? If there is actually another way, a guy is walking down by the river and could have had another path, and he goes down the path of the laundry. Rasha, well, he's obviously wicked because he's going down that place. What do you mean he doesn't close his eyes? He went down the path. Of course he's wicked. And and if there's no other way he could have go, so why is he considered wicked? Honestly, he had no choice. So the Gemara says, he had no choice. He has to walk that way. He still should close his eyes and try hard not to look. So basically, you have no choice. You have to go down that road. You have to walk in a place where, let's say, they're showing things you shouldn't see, but still you're supposed to push yourself to close your eyes and not look at those things. So now, since we quoted Rabbi Yochanan with Rabbi Benah, we cite other things. How should a Torah scholar wear their clothing? So you shouldn't be able to see his flesh underneath him, meaning it should cover his whole body. So how about the talis? Here, the talis means the overgarment of the Torah scholar. How should that look? Kol shein chelukun nir mitachtav tefach. You shouldn't see a tefach underneath the underneath the uh, underneath the talus of the chaluk. You should basically it should cover it up to a tefach, which is a hambre. Shulchan shel Talmid Chacham Ketzah. What about the table of the Torah scholar? So shnei shlishay gadil v'shlish galai. So 2/3 of it should be the tablecloth, and 1/3 should be revealed. What is this referring to? Rashbam says the width of the table should be covered by 2/3 of the tablecloth on the part where people are eating, so they could use it as a napkin and put the bread on it. And the other third should be revealed. That's where they put the plates and the cups. So basically, so as not to dirty the tablecloth, and then they wouldn't be able to use it as a napkin. That's the first approach of Rashbam. So these are way that they ate. So Rashbam says, Shulchan shel Talmid Chacham Ketzah shnei shlish kedil shlish galai v'alav karos v'yerek v'tabasol b'mechutz, and there will be plates and vegetables on the third that's uncovered, and the ring will be on the outer part. They had small tables, and they used to hang their tables, and they would use the ring to hang it, so that you should keep on the outer part of the table. Mar says, but don't we have a source that says the ring has to be on the inside? So no, it depends if there's a little kid there who could hurt himself on the ring. If he can, you put it on the inside, otherwise you put it on the outside. If you buy a Zema, in both cases, there's no little kid. It depends if there's an attendant who could hurt himself on the ring. In both cases, there's an attendant. Well, in one case, it's during the day. In one case, it's at night. Meaning to say, during the day, and then you could see the ring, and you could put it on the outside because he could be careful about it. But at night, put it on the inside. Then the Gemara says, "V'shal ha'aretz domo medura," and the ha'aretz, the non-Torah scholar, his table is similar to a bonfire, meaning to say where the plates are all around and the fire is in the middle, and so the bread and the tablecloth and the bread are in the middle, and the plates are around it. Mita shel Talmid Chacham Ketzah. What about the bed of a Torah scholar? If you just have the shoe wear, that's the only thing you're supposed to keep under your bed. Your bed should be clean and neat. That's the only thing you should keep there. Boom. And the Amaretz is it's going to be similar to a storage place. It's all mixed up. Means to say, he puts everything underneath of his bed, even the food and the dishes. He's just storing things underneath his bed. It's all mixed up. But the Torah scholar's bed is going to be neat and clean. That's how the Rashbam understands it. Rashi in Sukkah says that so Rashi and Sukkah has a little bit of a different explanation, but the way I was thinking about it is you have the Torah scholar has to have his shoes under the table, and that's it. Meaning to say, he views his bed as just an opportunity to get the energy to get up and do his mitzvahs. Whereas the Amaretz, he has everything underneath it. He's living in the bed. No, the bed is just a conduit to help you get the energy to do the mitzvah. All right, we'll stop here and God willing, we'll pick this up soon and